I won't be introducing Ise Bosch at the level she deserves. So she has over 20 years of experience in supporting human rights, women, sexual minorities. She's best described as a donor activist, a network, and a lobbyist for a transparent and transformative way of giving. She's a founder of many initiatives from Dreilinden, Pecunia, and Philea. But I think I'll give directly the floor to you. I know you have a sharp pen.
Yes, thank you, Deborah, and everyone. Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Derek, for wonderful words and great way of putting it. And excuse me reading my text. Here's my provocation regarding anti-racist impact investing. We might be doing the wrong thing in our foundations, or those of us advising foundations. We seek to empower communities of color, but we don't address a core part of empowerment, which is capital creation. If the problem is that there's too little capital in the hands of BIPOC and their community institutions, then philanthropy is not the best solution. Obviously, we need to transfer capital. Charity means giving to satisfy needs. No transfer of capital at all, pretty much. Philanthropy is institutionalized charity. Sorry to be blunt, but this is supposed to be provocative. While social change philanthropy is not charity, the logic of social change philanthropy is still giving to NGOs, usually giving for projects, for activism, but the capital usually stays in place, meaning usually in white hands. That is the status quo. How do we change it? Well, fund in ways that accrue capital on the other side. I want to mention businesses, property, and careers. What's good about impact investing in businesses by and for excluded communities? An investment is based on contracts as opposed to a gift. Even if in grant making we call them grant contracts, they are still really gifts with contractual elements. And power in gift giving tends to be unequal. When investing, there's a stronger logic aligning interest. It's one common bottom line. As a consequence, an investor will be less likely to drop an investee in trouble, for instance, than a grantee in trouble. Just make sure of two things. One, it's not extractive, meaning it's a model based on financial sustainability, not profit maximization. And two, people from the most excluded communities and backgrounds are included. Your capital can bring firms off the ground, generating jobs and, yes, wealth for communities and its members. Property should be an accessible form of capital transfer because grants or loans, they can be grants or loans toward buying or building to be owned by community organizations. Dreilinden is on a mission here regarding LGBTQI people, and transferring what we're learning toward property purchases by and for communities of colors seems only logical. You can also invest in job training and facilitate income creation or livelihoods. You can incentivize larger firms to diversify their staff by offering them loans at a rebate if they show progress in diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the logic. How come we as a sector are so far behind on this? It's the silos, I would venture. We from the grant making side don't feel we have the expertise to make the case internally. Often we have no say on how our institutions invest, and we shy away from confronting our peers in the investment department or engaging up the hierarchy. We could get quite a bit bolder here. So could advisors, for sure. And much of this can actually happen out of a section of the grant-making portfolio. This is my challenge. Not investing with a social lens, in my mind, is actually negligent. I wish everyone attending this breakout group a productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ise. I know you have a sharp end now, so I'm really grateful for you to be able to joining us up to now. So now we've heard about investments. We'll be also delving into more provocations, and this time more regarding participatory grant making, decolonial ethos, and more. The speaker for this part will be Chantelle de Nobrega, who is a South African feminist based in Cape Town with 15 years and more of experience in grant making, research, fundraising, community organizing, advocacy at various geographic levels, always with a particular focus on feminism, queer rights, socioeconomic rights, good governance, and ending racism. She's currently the program officer at Mama Cash, an international feminist women's funds based in the Netherlands. Chantelle, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So as you've heard, I'm Chantelle. I work at Mama Cash and I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, which is why it's so sunny. So today is about reimagining philanthropy to recreate or to reconceptualize it. And when I think about what that means, examining our assumptions is an important part of that process. So in the spirit of that, I want to encourage us to challenge one of the fundamental assumptions about what philanthropy is, as it is also at the heart of what is most problematic about philanthropy. And that is the question of whose money is this? Whose money are we talking about? So traditionally, we have thought of philanthropy as a system whereby money and resources that belong to one person or one group of people is being given to another group of people for the purposes of advancing human rights or improving people's lives. But is that true? When it comes to the wealth that individuals and nations possess, this has often been obtained at the expense of other people. We can see that through the history of nations and how colonization has allowed some countries to amass wealth and power. We can see that through laws or social practices, which have disenfranchised women and people of color for generations. So if this money has and continues to be accumulated through systems that advantage just a few people, then maybe we should be asking whose money is this really? So what could philanthropy look like if we want to reimagine a sector in which money and resources don't belong to philanthropists or foundations? That brings me to participatory grant making, which is one way whereby those most affected by historical and current inequalities are also the ones deciding how some of those resources are going to be used. Now, to be clear, participatory grant making, or PGM, as I'm going to call it, does not completely change the power dynamics we have been discussing, but it is a potential entry point to a process which does challenge the foundations of philanthropy. So what does this mean for Mama Cash? For several years, we have been trying out different models of PGM in some of our smaller portfolios. But since 2021, since last year, we now use it across our core grant making. Under our current model, once a year, groups apply to us. There is an initial screening by staff to ensure that groups meet our basic criteria. And then we send over 100 applications to an external advisory committee. This committee is made up of people who represent the communities we fund and we work with, specifically women, girls, trans, and intersex people, primarily in and from the Global South. They are the ones who decide where this money will go. And because we give core funding, it is then groups themselves who choose how to use this funding. Now, this is not a perfect model. It too has its power dynamics. But again, this is a starting point to shift how power works. The last point I want to make is that it is important to distinguish between a more democratic or a more collective decision-making process from what I am describing. PGM is not just about including more people in decisions. It is also about who you are including, about ensuring that those who are deciding on grant making are those people who do not usually make these decisions and those who have not been and those who have been most affected by inequality. So hopefully this tiny snapshot of the ways we are trying to reimagine philanthropy can inspire you.
Of course, thanks. Thank you very much, Chantelle. We need to keep on digging and adding another perspective also from the colonizing viewpoint to this work. And to that end, and to delve more also on grant making and internal work, I'd call on Laurence Meyer, who is a multilingual jurist and the racial and social justice lead at the Digital Freedom Fund. She currently co-leads the Decolonizing the Digital Rights Field process and the Digital Rights for All initiative. These are initiatives jointly conducted with EDRI. She's based in Berlin, and she's also co-founder of a film festival dedicated to Afro-descendant women and non-binary filmmakers in France. Laurence has written articles on issues of digital rights and the notion of race in law for French and German newspapers. Laurence, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone, and I'm happy to be here, first of all, and I'll try to be quick in my presentation. I'm Laurence Meyer, as she said. So many of the things I want to say have already been said, but I think it's actually good. That means like we are on the same track, and that's actually a happy thing. First of all, I want to remind a statistic that Derek shared. Black feminist movements receive somewhere between 0.1% and 0.35% of annual grant dollars from foundations. I'm going to share the link. It is a research done by Black Feminist Fund. So just up here, you can look into it. And we also know that social justice is linked to Black women liberation. There is no social justice until Black women and Black non-binary people are all liberated, not one, not two, not the 10%, all of them. So the structure of funding doesn't show the lack of strong organizations led by Black women and non-binary Black people, but rather the barriers put in place by the philanthropic world, which prevent access to resources to Black feminist organizations. Those barriers might be unintentional, but they are not accidental. They reproduce structures of exclusion that have their historical roots in the transatlantic trade, the genocide of indigenous people in the Americas, and the 19th century expansion of colonization by Europe. It is supported by the failure to admit how much of Europe's wealth is based on this history and how the structural inequality produced by it shapes the reality we live in. As an example, we can see the case of Haiti was as of late re-illustrated by the New York Times and based on many Haitian researchers' research. Talking about decolonizing funding is admitting that far from being part of the solution, funding is often in reality part of the problem. That rather than supporting radical change towards justice, it partakes in maintaining the status quo, which produces those injustices. So at DFF, what we're trying to do is to ensure that our impact is sustainable and that we are part of the historical cycle that bends towards justice and not towards more colonial power. We've been going through an internal decolonizing process regarding our grant making. And part of this process that we're undergoing with the support of a consultant led us to have interviews with people that have been doing amazing work already. So what I'm going to share is part of like the key learnings from those conversations that we had with Thousand Currents, with the Black Feminist Fund, and with Mama Cash. So the key questions that came out in those conversations is, what type of power do you have as a funder and why? Because so often we forget that funders' role is not to tell communities what they should do or how they should do it, because why would we have this power over them? And if we have the feeling that we have the power to dictate things, for example, by setting an agenda or priorities, or asking them to explain why it fits into our priorities, then we might want to ask, where does this money come from, as it was repeatedly asked? And even if the money seems to be clean, which is a questionable assumption, does money justify expertise in social change? Or is it perhaps exactly the contrary? Of a question, who are we accountable to? Is it to our grantees or to other donors? If we are accountable to other donors, is our job really philanthropy then? And if we say we're accountable to our grantees or to the communities we're in solidarity with, how can they exercise this? How can they exercise this exercise of accountability? How can they control us? Do they have a say in how grants are allocated? How do we report to them? How are our priorities decided? What does the room that decides those priorities look like? Is this room equipped to best understand our grantees' realities? As I say, as was explained before, but like Mama Cash and Black Feminist Fund, for example, chose to do participatory grant making in part to strengthen accountability towards their grantees. And finally, are we power sharing or are we power hoarding? Are we deciding what the priorities are for them, or are we building relationships of trust in which they can decide how to spend the money and be flexible? What are the duration of our grants? Why? How much of the information we require from our grantees is written and on fixed terms? What are the consequences if they fail to report on the deadline or in a certain manner? Why do we even need this report? Is it because it will help us better support the organizations in the future, or are we just burdening an organization to comply with an image of respectability? We are good funders, we ask the good type of reports. For 1,000 Currents, for example, which give flexible multi-year grants to their grantees, only has one reporting question. And the question is, what do you need us to know about the work that you did? Black Feminist Fund is planning on not asking any financial report, and they took upon themselves to check what was legally required and what was just common practice in philanthropy. And they felt like, okay, actually, we don't need financial report. This is not a legal requirement. And talking with Hakima Abbas, which is part of the Black Feminist Fund, she told us, our job is to take the risk for the organizations so that they can concentrate on doing the difficult job that they are already doing. So, yeah, I'm ahead and I'm concluding. If as a foundation, the work we do is dictated by minimizing risks, not necessarily in view of the topics we engage in, but through different types of procedures linked to our grant-making processes and compliance rules, we are actually not an agent of change, but an instrument of the status quo. Why do we need organizations to be registered, for example? Without risk, there can be no change. The question is, who is taking those risks? How are we redefining philanthropy as an enterprise to repair historical injustices and not as an act of kindness for which the organization should be thankful? Are we facilitating social and racial justice, or are we making oppression sustainable by giving it a social image? So, like, if we want to reimagine philanthropy, we might want to imagine it as a reparation tool. And I know Hannah introduced the conversation by saying that there are no easy answers, but there are already solutions on the table. There have been many reports. So the question is, what are we waiting for?